What's up, everyone? Let's take a look at episode 4 of A Shallow Dive, where we're going to take a look at actual part 2 of program design, where we're taking a look at principles of training. All right, so these principles of training, they are seen in almost and should be seen in almost every program to allow for proper progression and proper adaptation to occur either with an athlete, with a team, or with just a general program to a specific program. When we take a look at what we talked about last time in part 1, we took a look at planning for long terms. We took a look at macro cycles versus mesocycles. So that macro cycle being that annual program, mesocycles being about blocks of 4 to 6 weeks. And then we took a look at short-term planning, where we took a look at microcycles. Remember, those microcycles are about a week long. About 4 to 6 weeks make up a mesocycle. There's a certain amount of mesocycles within a macrocycle. That macrocycle may be either an annual, it could be a biannual, just depending on major competitions for that athlete or sport. Another thing we took a look at was training seasons, right, and how our program looks different in season versus off season, and how we use that post and preseason actually as transition periods to gear up either in volume or intensity. Speaking of volume and intensity, we did look at the relationship between the two of these. So as volume decreases, this allows for us to increase our intensity to make things either more complex or lift heavier weights. We also took a look at the role of competition in program design and how programs need to be designed around competition, more specifically practices and games, all right? That is the focus of the athlete's attention, is to win games or become better at practice. So our program cannot consume too much time or energy where their actual effort is decreased in that. Today, what we're going to look at, though, is principles of training and how these principles are actually applied into a program. First one we're going to look at is specificity. Then we're going to take a look at overload, and then finally progression. We're going to take a look at how these are affected season to season, so that in season versus that off season, and how they're different sport to sport. There are more principles, all right? However, we're just going to cover these three because these are the three basic ones that kind of lay out how a program should look and help with the easiest way. The more things we add into this becomes a little bit more complicated, and down the road is maybe something that you may want to look into on your own. But for today, we'll just cover these three principles. So to go back, we need to take a look at that general adaptation syndrome, because this is going to drive our program design. We take a look at phase 1, all right? Our immune system is at homeostasis. We're at a normal level, right, where our stress is equal to our body's adaptation. Phase 2 is that alarm phase, all right, where our body is in shock. Phase 3 is that resistance phase, and then phase 4, if we never can kind of recover, and especially in that resistance phase, is that exhaustion phase where we're always feeling fatigued. So that alarm phase, resistance phase, that body will respond to return to homeostasis, right? To create a new stressor, then you need something that is bigger, stronger, faster, right? You need to lift more weights. You need to try to run faster. You need to change things up to allow your body to adapt to that, right? If you're not pushing that, you're always going to stay kind of the same, and you're not going to improve. All right, so this purple circle represents where we constantly want to be when we take a look at program design. We want our body to create an alarm where we need to get as many resources as we can to respond, and we want to end up in that resistance phase and work back and forth between the two, where our body isn't constantly at homeostasis and we're not overexhausted. So when we take a look at specificity, more specifically, it is called the SAID principle. So it is a specific adaptation to an imposed demand. What that means, the more you train something, naturally the better you'll become at that thing. One thing to keep in mind, training in the weight room should assist athletes in movements for the sport, but it should not try to replace or mimic that sport. So, for example, if I have a volleyball athlete who is jumping 100 times in practice, the last thing I'm going to do is bring them in the weight room for them to jump more. All right, I want to create a program around what they did in practice and competition to decrease injury, improve performance, and make them engaged for longer periods of time. Nice quote that I like to go off of: the fastest athletes run the fastest in practice, and the strongest athletes lift the heaviest weights in training. So if you want to become faster, you need to develop ways to run faster. If you want to lift heavier weights in the weight room, you need to be the person who is constantly putting more weight on the bar. When we take a look at how specificity relates season to season, all right, with our 4 different seasons, our postseason, off-season, preseason, and in-season, we have our general kind of specificity and then specific specificity. So that's going to relate to our sport and trying to mimic and assist ways to make that athlete better. As we get closer to in-season, all right, our specificity is going to increase. So everything we do in the weight room is assist in the sport-specific movement, but not to teach the technique of these movements. So like I said, with the jumping, as a volleyball athlete gets closer to their season and they start jumping more, I want to start developing methods that is going to make their adaptation more specific to their sport. Another thing too, as competition leads into it, we want to do more things that are going to be related to competition. So when we actually take a look at what happens in the weight room though, this is more what it looks like. So as an athlete starts playing their sport, the specificity in the weight room decreases to prevent overuse injuries. Back to that volleyball example with the 100 jumps of practice, I don't want my athlete to come in and jump more. What I want to do is give them assistive exercises to decrease injury. So in the weight room, that specificity peaks in preseason, and then once we're in season, we're doing more injury prevention. When we take a look at overload, all right, when demand meets adaptation, we need to create a bigger and greater stress. All right, so what that means is either work your way down the dumbbell rack or increase the complexity of the movement. We can see the person on the right starts with a step up. That's going to be a lower complex movement and then finishes with a box jump. So this could be over time. However, sometimes we do need to scale back that stress. Remember, we don't want to end up in that exhaustive state. We want to find that balance between that alarm and resistive state. When we take a look at overload season to season, working on our same graph, all right, we do have a couple new ideas though. So we do have volume. So volume is going to be sets times reps, anything you want to do to keep count. And then we have complexity of movement. All right, so that volume, amount of work being done, complexity, technical control of the movement. As we go into our season, we want that overload to increase, either by increasing exercises, increasing sets, reps, or sessions per week. As we can see, when we go from postseason to off-season, we go from 4 sessions a week to 5 sessions a week. Or we can increase technical components. So as we go from our off-season to preseason, where we actually lose a session per week, we can increase that overload by making the movements we do a little bit more complex in the weight room. All right, so as we approach a season and volume decreases, we actually achieve overload with increased complexity of movements. When we take a look at progression and how it relates to principles of training and program design, what we're basically talking about, or what I like to refer to as intensity. All right, so what this entails is exercise prescription. So as we progress, we want that athlete to lift heavier weights. We have to take a look at the training progress of an athlete. Within a team, each athlete is to progress differently. Right? The goal is for them to all progress at the same level. However, when we take a look especially at a team that has athletes that are 18 years old versus athletes that are 24 years old, their progression is going to be completely different just based on maturity and time spent in the weight room. The other thing we need to take a look at is goals, all right? Either individual or team goals. Is what we're doing in the weight room helping achieve our goals in competition? So when we take a look at this progression season to season, working off the same chart that we had from overload, as we get closer to in season, we want that progression to increase. So we want our athletes to be better adaptive to the sport or competition they're about to entail. So the athlete can complete more complex movements if they progress properly throughout the program. If we start skipping steps in the program early, that athlete is not going to be able to progress later in the season and see that improvement. So the goal is to make small steps to lead to big increases versus making big steps and then not seeing those increases later in the season. All right, and like I said before, that athlete progression will differ from one athlete to another, especially depending on training age, time spent in the weight room, and just their overall general athleticism when it comes to weight room movements. So in conclusion, when we start developing a program, we want to look at specificity, overload, and progression. So that specificity is we want to do more volume of sport-like movements or increase that intensity closer to the season or even competition. Our overload, going into an off season, we want to increase the volume for that athlete. And then going into a season, we want to increase the complexity of workouts. When we take a look at progressions, each athlete will progress differently, especially when comparing rookies to seniors, and that athlete responds better to progression when that overload is specific to their sport. So I hope you enjoyed episode 4 of a shallow dive into program design. This was actually part 2, where we took a look at principles of training. Part 3 will be coming out next week.